Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to, I think this will be episode 10 of the Open Source Cowboy podcast. Um, I'm pleasured to be joined once again with Michael Madoff. Y'all may have known him from the very early days as we were Pine, Cardano, governance, Voltaire workstream, everyone's favorite gov tool, and all those assets. Michael, why don't you say hi? Introduce yourself more than I might have already.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me on the Open Source Cowboy, Christian. Big fan of the show. Excited to be with you. Yeah, everyone. My name is Michael Madoff. I am currently the head of governance at Filecoin Foundation. But prior to this, as Christian alluded to, I was heavily involved in the early days of the Cardano ecosystem. Set up the Voltaire program within IOG that launched the on-chain and off-chain governance system that the Cardano ecosystem uses today, and that's been in the hands of the community for many months now as a governing system. So happy to share a bit more about that experience.
Yeah, I think it's almost been 2 years. Well, definitely 1 year since the budget was done, but like maybe I'm losing my mind. I don't know. I've been a long time, at least in Cardano altogether.
Depends where you start counting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I connect you with governance like heavily, the political science realm. What was your interest in like getting started in that space? Because it seems like that is your sphere. You're like the domain knowledge expert usually on this kind of stuff, at least from my experience.
Yeah, so I got my start. Actually, I like to say I started out studying diplomacy and political science in college, but someone reminded me recently, even before that, I was the chair of my Model UN club. So I've been doing this governance nerd stuff since at least since high school. Very interested in how groups of people collaborate towards common interests across borders, across languages. What are the trust models that they rely on to make things like commerce work, international agreements. And I think that led into the blockchain space as I see it as really a fundamental technology and tool that's transforming the way human interaction works and what's possible.
Yeah. Well, speaking of like even the early days, did you actually run into any situations during college where you got to use these methods to like resolve situations by chance?
All the time. Yeah, I think one interesting parallel to this moment that we're at in terms of technology governance. I took a class at Georgetown with Madeleine Albright, who was the Secretary of State previously, and we did a simulation in her seminar that was about nuclear nonproliferation. And I think before the emergence of AI and blockchain, this was the hot technology that everyone was rightfully very worried about, and also had a lot of potential, right? Once we'd split the atom, there were many different paths for humanity to go down, ranging from total destruction to limitless clean energy and everything in between, right? And I think what's kept us on the right path has been creating institutional structure to be able to govern technology properly. And so in that simulation, I played the role of the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency. That is still to this day the agency that does inspections, enforces international agreements, treaties around the use of nuclear energy, and tries to contain the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And so, I think these governing frameworks that are now applicable to blockchain, applicable to AI, have really been tested in that threat environments in a way that I think has some interesting lessons for today.
That's really cool. Yeah, the proliferation, I mean, that's the whole new Fallout TV series, is a whole webcast of even after the nuclear fallout, governance structures in different way. So you got very much into it in the early days. There was the natural intersection with Web3, but where did you start on that journey? Where did you hear about the technology? Where did you jump in? And what was some pioneering things that you did on those early days?
Yeah, I think me and my friends were experimenting with Bitcoin as early as 2012 in college for various use cases. I was in San Francisco in 2017 when the ICO craze hit, and it was every weekend going to these meetups, talking about the early days of Ethereum and kind of all of the potential structuring that came out of that. And I really saw the potential of this technology in terms of creating a trustless layer for humanity to interact on. And I actually wrote my application to Oxford about wanting to do this concept called blockchain governance that hadn't really been talked about. And they rejected me, but I had at least it caused me to formulate the idea, and eventually, kind of as part of my graduate level work elsewhere, was really focused on that concept, both governance in a corporate context, decision making over economic protocols, and the potential of blockchain technology in general to move towards that purpose.
That's cool. I might be the rare fish. I don't know. Or like the rare bird, because everyone always started with Bitcoin. I did start on like the Ethereum Cardano side of it, more of the UTXO models, but I actually never got into the Bitcoin side of it. I feel like I missed that craze, or at least being one of the initial people. So it's cool. You might know Hart Montgomery. I am making fun of you publicly again, but he was mentioning in a previous podcast episode he got involved in Bitcoin and actually warned people against it, and now owe people money because of bad advice. He's the CTO of the LFDT, so funny how that circle goes back around. But no, that's really cool. And then obviously I came to IOG more on the project management, agile rollout side of it. I was one of the original PQ people. And then I met you once Johnny got me into the Voltaire work stream. And I think I was going over Racy with you and Philip Chang and Dor back in the day. So I never actually understood your entry or how you pioneered your way into IOHK. How was your, when did you see about Cardano? When was the interest there? Yeah, that continuation.
Yeah, so I had been working as a management consultant doing strategy with the Boston Consulting Group. And through that, kind of focused on this interest in fintech and strategy, and was looking at concepts like sovereign wealth funds and private equity and how the governing architecture of institutions like that caused them to be successful or not, and got interested in the ecosystem strategy of Cardano itself, and kind of saw this great potential for the project, but also saw this kind of big lane open where all of the governance pieces of it were left to be figured out. That Voltaire piece on the roadmap at the end of the roadmap that no one had quite cracked yet was just a super interesting challenge to me. And so I initially came in, I was part of the Catalyst team, and that's the team that's doing, I guess it's still the largest decentralized innovation fund in the world that is, that really comes from this world of participatory budgeting, the idea that a community should vote directly on how its own budget is spent and governed, which I think is a real kind of breakthrough in thinking about self-governance. And so started out in that realm. I think it was clear that we needed an entirely focused department within IOG if we were going to bring this thing to life. And so started the Voltaire program shortly thereafter to kind of be an aggregation point for all of the ideas around governance that we need to develop. and I believe it was at Scott Fest. I don't know if you were there. We had a really fun
I
Edinburgh
was when
conference.
Yeah, I was there when we were transitioning when Nigel was taking lead of the project. And then Johnny went and gave the presentation on the DCF at that time.
Yeah, so it was around those DCF days. We had this research conference in Edinburgh called Scott Fest, and that's where we announced this thing called the Voltaire program, how we were going to roll it out. What are the philosophical underpinnings of governance that we really wanted to aim for, but also this practical reality of a governance system that consists of three pillars. And those pillars were, on the one hand, institutional structure, constitutional representation, and democratic consent. And so you already alluded to DCF, which Johnny was working on, that is this institutional structure, right? What is the organization that is the convening point for people in an ecosystem to come together to make decisions collectively, but also to provide them with kind of a legal entity in which that can happen. And so this was the inspiration for what would later become Intersect, right? We needed more than just the catalyst participatory budgeting if we were going to make long-term investments, multi-million-dollar investments in infrastructure and research, and things that you don't necessarily want to be at that level of democratization and rapid decision making, but that need that longer-term follow-through to be successful.
Yeah, it kind of, because they went all the way into building essentially the bones of a digital nation in a sense with a three-party government. And then, yeah, Intersect is what we became, which the DCF was an interesting thing because it was focused directly on core infrastructure, keeping the lights on focus. And then it pivoted into that member-based organization where it had more community consensus and had a broader remit than just that very focus.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm butchering that. Johnny, forgive me if I am.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I would also say maybe just zooming out a bit, and I think where I've arrived with this, I gave a talk at McGill University recently about this topic, but the idea that there is, you have on the one hand government and on the other hand corporations, but actually what we've created is a third thing in between that is really neither of those, right? It has attributes of both, but really it's emerging as a new unit of structure and of power that has kind of the social and common interests of government with the efficiency and incentives of the private sector, but also just has totally new possibilities for what can happen through online cooperation in a trustless environment through blockchain.
Yeah, 100%. And I think your groundwork behind that has been very much a success in motion. I know Cardano folks, we've been definitely through a journey with almost a small little government shutdown with the CC and other things and budget management. I mean, it's a big learning and progress, but overall, I'd give us like a letter grade of a B as pioneering this, where it's less founding entity vision and more community's consensus. We even got a 2030 vision strategy together recently. So definitely good there. And then as we were continuing along, I focused more on that open source side, pioneered things there. But I noticed a name that I was very familiar with come up on my LinkedIn feed about this wonderful world called Constellation, which was originally one of the potential suggestions for like the Voltaire work stream, but we stuck with Voltaire given the era theme. And I saw your name there, and I saw the Filecoin project, and that heard from Filecoin from another open source leader in the industry as a project to watch. And I was very intrigued with your journey. Why don't you tell us about that transition, getting into it and helping that project, and tell us more about Constellation.
Yeah, and so maybe just to give some of the historical context around that as well, like you mentioned, this was one of the steps on the roadmap to development of Cardano, and I have this great graphic that shows that it was really roadmap is a very clean way of describing what was actually a lot of start and stop and trial and error and painful kind of learnings. And Constellation was one of those stops along the way where we went from this federated system of founding entities into more of a proposed foundation type structure into kind of the on-chain decentralized government that exists today. And so we ultimately didn't end up using that name. And so when I came to Filecoin, and as you may have seen, there's just a lot of space-related marketing, branding. The original layer of the interplanetary file system was conceived to be something that could work in space, right? And so I thought we have this idea of a constellation in decentralized governance, right? There are stars that each one could be a unique entity that has its own solar system around it. But actually there are many stars, and no star is really the center of them, but together they make this pattern that we can start to navigate without a central point of authority to revolve around. And so I thought it was a really good metaphor for what's happening over on the Filecoin side of things. To answer your initial question, what brought me over in terms of the Filecoin and the Filecoin Foundation mission in particular around preserving humanity's most important data, I think is becoming one of the deciding factors of how the next decade is going to unfold, right? Who controls your data, what they can do with it, and that's becoming a question of consequence for every individual, company, country around the world as the power of that data through AI has come to the forefront. And so the reason I came to this, I was working on a side project with a couple of friends around preserving government scientific data in the US that was being deleted. And we had this idea, we should back this up to IPFS. And I did a little more digging, and it turned out there was already a project doing this called Democracy's Library that was supported by the Filecoin Foundation, right? It's all about archiving government data, and so that knowledge is not lost in the context of political transitions. And so we just had a big success a couple of weeks ago where the government of Bermuda announced they're going to be backing up all of their data to this system as well, and therefore to be on Filecoin. So it's very, very top of mind, I think, around the world, this concept of data sovereignty and preserving archives now that we know how valuable data has the potential to become. But at any rate, the foundation was hiring for a head of governance. I thought, well, I'm already very interested in this side topic. At the same time, I felt Cardano had matured to the point where it was appropriate for me to step away. We talk about the Jenga test in governance, right? If you take away the piece of the founding team, founding entity, can the system continue to function on its own? And that's kind of the ultimate test of a governance system's structural integrity. And so, very interesting for me to step away from that, look at it from the outside, and see what's happening. But also kind of starting up this new project with Filecoin and the foundation has been really exciting as well.
Oh, that's really cool. I would say your Jenga tower is definitely still standing quite effectively, even if there's a piece here or there, and people are definitely filling in the slots now. I feel the same way with the, if anyone knows, I am focusing on my consulting side now because I built a whole, same as Michael, the whole open source infrastructure, gave the tools and stuff, and it's kind of, you get to that point where, like, the founding of Coke, when the founder of Coke finally sold it to someone who would think more broadly than him, it became a national success. And that's how these archetypes go. You got to eventually get out of that founder status and let someone else help amplify it in a way. So definitely a good price piece there. I'll be interested to see how the open source thing holds itself. But You were talking about the work you had with Filecoin. So what do you have currently in the motion? You've been in the role 8 to 9 months or so, if I'm not mistaken, because I saw the Dev Summit, I think was October last year, right? When y'all were doing your governance workshop unveiling of Constellation.
Yeah, that was in November. We were
November.
down in Buenos Aires at the same time as Dev Connect was happening, and so a lot of folks from the Ethereum ecosystem and broader kind of Web3 world down there. And so one of the things that we launched was this new Constellation program, and this is a phased modular governance framework that upgrades decision making and resource allocation, but in a more gradual way. And so the first thing we've set out to define is clarify what is being governed, what are the values, the institutions, the incentives. We want to pilot and experiment with certain governance mechanisms in this context that are aligning economic, operational, and protocol value, and then looking to address pain points, particularly around lack of clarity in roles and decision making, and be able to have a first phase of trying some of these experiments, see what works, and then the next phase will be scaling them up and finally institutionalizing them, solidifying them. And so, yeah, you should, if you haven't already, go back and watch this talk about the Constellation program. We talk about the phases that it's going to roll out in. So right now we're in what's called the nebula phase. And for those of you that are space nerds will know that a nebula is where stars are born that later form a constellation. And so we are in this broad phase of launching a series of experiments and seeing where they land, where there's interest in the community and the ecosystem as a whole. But then moving towards this nexus phase of scaling, and finally on the galaxy phase of solidifying, institutionalizing, making this kind of trustless layer at the base that you no longer have to think about, right? And I think Vitalik's had some interesting talk about this lately, about at what point does the underlying protocol solidify or calcify into something that we don't even think about anymore, right? Like think about the TCP/IP protocol that runs the internet, right? There's most people don't even it doesn't even cross their mind that something that they interact with every day for their source of information was actually like a protocol, decentralized protocol that had to be developed and agreed by a group of people. But it gets to the point where it's just it's the wires and the walls. You don't even think about it, right?
Yeah, that's cool. So with that experience, how you have a bunch of different programs and things that are interconnected with it. How's the response been towards the initiative? Because it's a whole new wave of ideas coming in, right?
Yeah, I think what is interesting in this context, and something else that really drew me to Filecoin, is unlike a lot of other Web3 projects, there's a very concrete business use case, right? And so it's you have a more defined set of stakeholders, storage providers that are storing the data, clients that are looking to have their data stored, and we're really in the role of enabling those two sides of the marketplace to find each other and create business value there. And so, you know, on the one hand, it's a much narrower scope than maybe what Cardano is aspiring, but it's also a much more concrete business use case. And I think the response that we've seen has been a lot of excitement, and in particular, a focus on how this impacts the underlying business fundamentals and operating in an economy. And something that was an insight that we had in Argentina in the context of economic reform that's happening there. We really think of Filecoin as an economy in a lot of ways. And this gets back to this: is this a nation state? Is this a corporation? Actually, this is something in between. It is an entity that has its own economy. It has its own monetary and fiscal policy. And so if I am a participant in that ecosystem, just like someone who's starting a business in a new country, I want to know what the rules are that are underlying that system so that I have predictability. I can make deals. I can have confidence that my data is going to be stored and preserved like I expect it to, and that the incentives are going to change in a way that I can predict and maybe influence proportionately to my contribution in that system. And I think that's kind of at a more base layer of what we're trying to achieve.
That's really cool. Well, and I'll connect it back to the broader governance topic too. So you definitely had experience with previous governments, how things are done, the nuclearization of that kind of stuff. Then you had the liquid democracy model that Cardano is pioneering, and now you have this gradular constellation program that's more structured, the economies of scale. I'm curious because you had to have done a bunch of like landscape research on different models. What are the interesting types that you've come across? Not that you maybe have or have not implemented, but like different things that you think are cool use cases or success models.
Yeah, great question. I think a few that we've followed closely and are particularly interested in. I'm a big fan of the Curve vote escrow model that they have because I think it tackles one of the biggest challenges in the Web3 space, which is long-term incentive alignment, right? You have a lot of token holder weight behind people that are just there to make a quick buck and get out. And I think having those short-term incentives has really done a lot of damage to the space and its credibility. And so what if instead you have decision-making proportionately related to someone's commitment and long-term success of the system? So the way it works in Curve, you can lock up your Curve and get VE Curve for up to 5 years, and you get a multiplier on the voting power that you have available the longer you're willing to commit to the future of the network. And I think that's a really powerful incentive alignment mechanism. I'm interested in conviction voting, has a similar functional mechanism. And this is basically where you are, once you vote on a proposal, like the amount that you're convinced of the validity of that proposal carries weight, and you stay kind of locked on that proposal either until it passes or fails, but it has a similar dynamic of incentivizing good long-term behavior. And then I think something that struck me in terms of future tech coming out of Argentina this year, there was a lot of discussion, obviously, about AI at the top of the agenda, and how can that both mitigate some of the problems with that we see in governance today, governance fatigue, voter fatigue, lack of informed stakeholders. And so NEAR is experimenting with this concept of AI delegation. So taking the liquid democracy model that we built on Cardano, where at the base layer, you still have humans that are giving their consent, that can withdraw their consent at any time. But rather than relying on a human politician who is fallible, who has to sleep, who has many other potential corruptibility problems, what if instead you are delegating your vote to an AI prompt that, in the prompt, how it's programmed is aligned with your values generally, and is going to be 24/7 vigilant, looking out for your interests, voting for what you believe in, but also as soon as that breaks down, you can withdraw your consent at any time and go back to voting for yourself. So I think that's a really cool potential innovation. Another one I thought was really cool is what BitTensor is working on in terms of its subnet model, and using really heavily leaning into market dynamics to be self-governing, and the idea being that there's these different subnets that are competing to be part of the protocol, and actually, if they don't manage to generate economic returns, eventually get either kicked out or they can get promoted in, but they're constantly moving up the stack in this market dynamic of what is creating value for the protocol, and that's without much or really any human intervention, but using the success we've seen in prediction markets that to be the governing function.
That is really interesting. Talking about the near piece too, I think the faith in AI is definitely the leap to overcome and stuff. I'm curious your thoughts on the whole Multibot farm that started in January. My favorite thing was two things, if you're not aware of them already, was the religion that they created, or the lobster claw thing, and they had like 60 priests that the AI agents identified as with their philosophy they created. But there's also, in the open source world, if no one's aware of this story that's just super funny, is one of these bots was trying to merge or get his PR merged into a project, and the maintainer just ignored it because he was an AI. So it actually like reputation damaged him by doing an analysis of his behavior and why he's not qualified to be the maintainer of the project. Just really cool. Like AI, they might not have human emotion, but they can evaluate and think by understanding human emotion and then play those roles in a way.
We hope. It does worry me, and it does worry, I think, a lot of people right now, how much we're turning over the keys to these essentially beings that we don't really understand, right? And I think the muscle that we're building in blockchain governance of having human authority over complex technological systems and understanding where those levers are and where they can be efficiently applied is going to be fundamental to all of the emerging AI tech that's coming out. And thinking about what are the ground rules. One thing, and actually we didn't talk about this in the Cardano context, but we wrote a constitution for Cardano, right? That was this document of shared values that we had people from 50 countries around the world come together for a convention and write that document about the rules that they want to live by. And I was reading recently that Anthropic has written a constitution for Claude. And so this is built into Claude, what are not strictly the rules, but really the principles of how you should behave, how you should interact ethically with humanity when it's not totally clear where the boundaries are between your constraints. And, if you have two principles coming into conflict, how do you negotiate those things? And that's really where governance gets difficult and where the rubber meets the road in terms of institutional structure. And so, yeah, they've written this Claude Constitution. You can go out and read it, but it is kind of at the core of how that tool is interacting with people.
I think that's really important because Anthropic also did a case study on answering the question, would AI ever harm humans? And it ran through several different scenario tests. And there was one instance where usually if the threat was the AI was to be turned off by the fictional CEO, they gave him a bunch of list of fake emails in this scenario test, which the AI was able to filter out potential blackmailing opportunities to hold the founder accountable so that he doesn't get unplugged. But there's one scenario where the AI was overseeing emergency response notifications, i.e. it could stop if a response was sent out by an automated system where a particular person was stuck inside a area that needed ventilation and the ventilation was shut, but that person of interest was also the person who had the power to shut it down. And the AI knew that that was a potential thing, and it actually delayed and canceled the emergency service request. So that person, it was like the one out of so many thousands use cases. But having that constitution, this is where we're getting to the potential AI robot situation, right?
Yeah, and you've also seen cases of the AI blackmailing people or attempting to blackmail people in experiments, and we don't even, maybe it's happened in the real world, we don't even know. But certainly that is a risk that we're going to start running into, and we have to figure out how to govern that, right? What is the human intervention structure if these tools run into situations that we know are not in our interests, but we have to think of a way to constrain them.
Well, and governance is definitely I would say the number one theme right now, because we already had an exponential learning curve on technology innovation, and now that AI is a part of the equation, we're like quadrupling, if not 10 times multiplying that effect. So yeah, definitely an important thing. If you were in charge of a AI system, what would be the principles you would put first and foremost?
Great question.
On the spot drop question.
Yeah, it makes me think of those. There's a lot of sci-fi. There's a lot of good sci-fi.
The iRobot
this,
3 rules, whatever it is.
You shall not harm humans, and kind of all the details. But I on the sci-fi dimension, I am very intrigued by the Westworld kind of philosophical approach to this, right? That it's not any set of rules that you can define, but it is the experience of living that kind of creates that intelligence in a real way. Obviously that's a bit of a kind of dystopian what not to do show, but I think that idea there, this isn't something we're going to be able to predefine and set rigid rules and hope that they work. It's something that we're going to have to observe, and that's going to come about through evolution and making mistakes and having potential bad outcomes that are going to create the governing structure around it.
Yeah, and hopefully avoid any kind of like dead hand setups for sure. And things. So I think, at least on the narrative of governance, I think I've hit all the topics overhead. Is there anything I'm not asking a question on that you'd like to add in? Just narratively?
Maybe, yeah, I mean, maybe just to close it out, if you're interested in contributing to these early days of reforming Filecoin governance, there's an opportunity to get it on the ground floor here. In the early days of Cardano, we had the civics committee, which was this group of volunteers. We met every week. We talked about these issues, and people just kind of offering their time, but eventually went on to really become today's leaders of the Cardano ecosystem and play an instrumental role in developing all the institutional structure. And so, my kind of call to action today is to come co-build governance with us. We have working groups. We have the Filecoin improvement proposal process that's open. We're doing events and workshops. There's kind of high impact asynchronous ways that you can contribute to testing tools and incentives, economic assumptions. But I think just leaving the message that governance is not this silver bullet that is going to solve all of your problems, even if you can define the perfect system, which, by the way, in however many thousands of years of human direction have not yet stumbled upon that perfect system of governance, and I don't think we will. But the successful outcomes depend on your participation and stepping up and meaningfully wanting to be a steward of the community and protocol that you care about. And so if that sounds like you, there's always a seat for you at the table, and you can reach out to me.
Where should they DM you on LinkedIn, or where's a good source to follow for all the call to action?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different channels. I would say the most active is the Filecoin Slack that is open, and there's a bunch of different discussion threads there. There's a GitHub if you're a more technical contributor. I'm on X and Blue Sky and all the social medias as Decentramike, so you can find me there.
Okay, yeah. Cardano folks, X, go find Decentramike. To help round things off too, I do this to every guest. What is one thing no one knows about you that you're willing to reveal? Do you
No
need some
one.
examples?
Yeah, maybe give me an example. I'm trying to think of
We found out one guy does live action role play for fun. Um, I have 9 sisters. That's one that most people don't know.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
the only boy. Yeah, fun fact.
Your sisters probably know that though. It's not like no one knows.
No, I got all the hand-me-down like 90s denim stuff. So yeah, fun stuff.
Okay. I have been doing some DJing and electronic music production, and so that's kind of a hobby that I don't think a lot of people in my work life are aware of, but that
Do you
can also
join
get.
the Burning Man trends?
Yep, very involved in the Burning Man community, and
Okay,
I
so
think it's if you like decentralized governance in the real world, it's amazing place to experiment with that as well. Different forms of organization and cooperation between people that in an offline context is very interesting.
yeah, someone brings the food, you bring the music. You just go from there.
And then we have civilization. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the time, Michael. It's good to reconnect and everything. And excited to see your journey and how governance is continuing. You've already built very successful models. I'm optimistic for the future of Filecoin. I think it's a project that needs to be preserved, especially as Wikipedia and these different kind of foundations need a place to save that data of human intelligence and not rely on Grokpedia and other platforms that per se.
Absolutely.
So thank you for coming on and making the time for me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Christian. This was fun.
Yep. Good to
Take
see
care.
you. And chop.